welcome to this episode of the Next Gen webinar. And I'm excited to have one of my very good friends with me today. And that's Jennifer Pete. Just also, Jennifer has been with us multiple times. And so you'll have to check out the ministry she does with Aldersgate. But also, the focus of today's webinar is my really good friend, Stephanie Caro. And so she and I have known each other. We met on the couch at the National Youth Workers Convention in Louisville while a tornado was tearing apart southern Indiana. It was scary. We were there, and you could see the storm out the window that we were sitting near. And we said, we probably should move away from this window. You remember that, Stephanie?
I do, especially since the conference people had said, tornado warning, let's all gather in the ballroom. Mm-hmm. And you and I just kept sitting sort of oblivious to all of this until we looked outside and the sky was dark and we thought we should move. Yeah, I'm not sure we did, but we thought we should.
We thought we should have probably listened to them, but from that we launched a great friendship and partnership over the years, and she helped mentor me in a book that we wrote, and it was released in 2016. And so she has been a speaker for us at both Summer Sizzler and Warmth and Winter. And she's been a speaker at multiple events across the United States, right? And so, but I'm going to let her give you the rest of her story, because her story, while she looks like she just is only in her 20s, she actually has had a lot of experience. So go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh, gee, yeah, sure. I look like I'm in my 20s. Never mind. Well, nice to meet you, Jennifer, and anybody else that's watching. Thanks for letting me be on, Brad. I am a lifelong children's youth worker. So I spent 30 years or so working in the Florida Conference of the Methodist Church, serving 5 churches there. So while on church staff, I was always connected somehow to children and youth ministry. And then in 2008, this guy named Mark DeVries and his pal Jeff Dunrankin said, hey, would you like to come to work for this little company called Youth Ministry Architects? And I was like, I don't know what that is, and I don't know who you are, but I checked it out. And so in 2008, I started kind of hanging out with the folks there from what is now known as Ministry Architects, because we do youth, children, churchwide, anything. And in 2010, I stopped serving in a church full-time, moved to Houston and started traveling full-time. And at the time sort of began a little specialty in being curious about how children's and youth ministry works, especially in small churches. And, just had the pleasure of being able to publish several books in small church ministry, and have one coming out. Hey, Brad, my latest book that's taken me 5 years is actually coming out. So
I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you.
Finally. And so small church is my little niche. Though I certainly work in my consulting work. I'm now senior consultant for Ministry Architects, and I get to travel all over, working with children's and youth workers, writing stuff, teaching at workshops, hanging out with folks like you all, and all of this while I get the pleasure of volunteering at my own church. And so, tonight I am going to our local park because we're having our closing Wednesday night program, and I am a crew leader for a bunch of kindergarten through 4th graders. And so I got my 12 little kids, and we're having our closing end of the year picnic, and I can't believe a year has gone by already, school year anyway. So I get to be a volunteer while I teach about volunteering. And that's the subject of what we're talking about today, right, Brad?
That's right. Volunteering, recruiting, and retaining and celebrating, or whatever it morphs into.
Right. In our work with, in my work in consulting with ministry architects, or even just teaching in workshops, when you ask folks what are their number one struggles, whether it's a small church, a medium church, a big church, they generally say two things. We don't have enough money/resources, and we don't have enough volunteers. That's always.
Yep.
Does that sound familiar to you,
Yep.
Jennifer? This is my
Yep.
friend Jennifer, who's also on there.
She's nodding accordingly.
She's nodding.
She can turn on her mic if she wants to.
She could, except she's probably jamming out to like the soundtrack from Hamilton or something in her office.
There she is. She's
No.
back.
There she is.
No.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. We're going to talk about some key tips of who volunteers are, what they're looking for, and some ways to kind of develop them a little further. And I know that this workshop has even been impacted just in my last couple of years of volunteering. Now that I've been kind of volunteering in my church, and I am quote unquote just a volunteer, I've kind of learned some things from this side of the fence.
And you might hit on that in your training, but that was a question. Sorry, folks, I've got a cough. What have you learned about the volunteer process by being a volunteer? Like the whole process that you teach on and so on. Because I'm sure that you've gained a lot, and maybe you'll talk about that in your.
Yeah, I think the folks listening might not know this, but Brad personally has heard me teach my volunteer workshop, gosh, maybe 10 times or close to that.
Yeah.
With all of the cohort years we did, that was 5 times, plus some other conference times you've heard me teach it. And so Brad's going to notice the difference right away, because there's going to be a couple of slides that we're going to go through together that are similar. And then you're going to see a couple of things where this is what I've learned by me being a volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't negate any of the stuff I've taught before, but I learned more of the, what's the volunteer thinking, from this.
Good.
So.
Yeah, and that's what I was wondering. Like, I'm sure the knowledge that you gain just from being on the other side of not the one recruiting, but the one being recruited. Yeah.
Or actually, in what you'll hear me say, not actually being recruited enough.
Yeah, true. True.
That's what we find, when we go in to do assessments at churches, when ministry architects goes in, a staff member will say, I've asked everybody. I mean, we've asked in the bulletin, we've called people, we've talked to people. And in the very next listening group, a group of parents will say, we offered to help and nobody ever called us. Nobody's ever asked us. So there's this big void between what feels like you're asking as a staff person and what potential volunteers aren't hearing, or they're actually not hearing it because they're really not being asked. And so
Yeah.
So you ready for me to share my PowerPoint?
Sure, go right ahead.
Hey, so Jennifer, what are your thoughts?
Well, I am a volunteer at my church, and so I'm anxious to hear what you say about what you've learned, because you are also a volunteer, see if it's similar to what I've experienced. But honestly, because we're not a church, we're in more of a parachurch organization. We don't have weekly type of things, but I still have to have volunteers for most of our ministry has to be volunteer because there's only 5 of us as staff. So we can't do it all. And we're an adult, youth, and children ministry. So we've got to find volunteers for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just looking forward to just learning more and just understanding how to better recruit them in my case, because they're not just here in Tennessee, they're across the United States. So it's finding them, and it's in my case, because the other role that I do have here besides Next Generation is I am the director over our local church events, and having the adult team members that are trained working with them and training them at the opportunities that we have at conferences, but then also needing to do Zoom training like we're doing, like we're doing today, or just video training because someone may be in California and the conference is in Illinois or something, and they just can't make it, but they need to do the training. So yeah.
I think I just know, 10 years ago, I knew that we were about to hit online training. Zoom, I don't think Zoom existed quite yet, but I knew we were getting there. 5 years ago, we were just starting it. And I remember thinking, eventually so much of all of this is going to be done by this. And now I think, here we are. And people still like face-to-face because they like interaction.
Right.
But just like blogs, just like podcasts, just like things like this, people are searching online and looking and watching. It's not that they're not doing it. They just can't do it in the time frame to show up to a church and be face to face.
Right. And that's one of the reasons why we provide it in both formats, both as a video, if they want to sit down and watch it, or as a podcast, if they want to pull it up on their phone while they're driving in their car and listening to it. I was on a trip. I think I was out to Knoxville, and so I decided to go ahead and go back and listen to some of the podcasts on the way back, and it was just really what you forget when you're the person that's on this side helping interact with the person who's doing the presenting, what all is presented sometimes. And so there were some really good stuff that we've had, just like this one will be available. That's portable, and accessible. And so, and I, like you're right, Stephanie, I think like trying to, when I can reach you, who you're down in Houston, and you can provide training for people here in Tennessee or whoever connects to this. It's something that, I think we can continue to maximize along the way,
Well, let me give a little disclaimer then. I love my home church. I think my home church does a fabulous job. I was just saying to someone on a coaching call this morning that I work really hard not to be a consultant at my own home church, because that wouldn't win me any friends there. So I try really hard not to consult or evaluate. And so what's interesting are the things I'm learning. I'm really just trying to have a volunteer mindset. But one of the compliments I paid my church this morning is that one thing they're really good about in their children and youth ministry decisions, when I've asked why we do this instead of that, there are very intentional reasons. And the fact that they're very intentional wins me every time. Even if it's a direction I might not have chosen, the fact that it's been intentionally thought through means that they've weighed all sides and chosen the best course. And I love that. I wish more churches did that. Sometimes we just let too many things just go along as is, and we don't have the conversation. But anyway, hey, let's get started. Well, we've really already started, aren't we? Okay, and so who are today's volunteers? And several of these points here that you can see on the screen, and then for those of you listening, I'll kind of go over them one by one. There's 5 identifiers, and there's certainly others, but these 5 came from a book by Jonathan McKee and his dad, Don McKee, both of whom work with a lot of volunteers in different settings. But it's a book called The New Breed, and it really struck me at a right time. It's been edited and brought out a few different times, but it was just wise, and there was great conversation. And so the thing about volunteers is that there are people volunteering at an all-time rate. The conundrum is they're not always volunteering in our church settings, but in work settings, they're in home life settings, in school settings, in communities there's a lot of room for volunteering. So the conundrum is that we're sharing volunteering bandwidth with so many other people. And I think this is helpful to know, because churches should not assume, well, people are just not volunteering. They are. We may be too slow in asking them to volunteer, and we also may be not connecting them to enough of what they need to want to say yes to us, and they say yes to other people first, you know? Today's volunteers are smart. And what I mean by that is, of course, they're smart. But, 20 years ago, let's look like back when doing youth ministry in the 1990s, and when I was on staff as a director of youth ministry, I was really on staff the only one that knew anything about youth ministry, because you couldn't Google anything. I was the one that the brochures came to about the latest book, this new book by some guy named Doug Fields, Purpose-Driven Youth Ministry. What's that book about? But I was the one that got all the advertisement for that. You couldn't go online and see it. Well, now, if I needed a lesson for youth group on the fruits of the Spirit, me or any volunteer could Google it as quick as I could Google it. Somebody volunteer, whether it's staff or volunteer, could find training online. So today's volunteers are smart. They can find expertise as quickly as we can from some of the same places. Maybe the one thing that those of us in ministry for a while still bring to the table is we've just done this a few more times. You know what I mean? The details any of us can find. Now, we've just been here before. So maybe it's bringing our institutional memory. Today's volunteers need flexibility. And this very webcast, this very Zoom meeting, and the audio that comes from it is proof of that. 100 other people may watch this. They're just not watching it today. And so in churches and in our youth and children's ministry, we have to stop. This is kind of a boomer trait that we need to set aside. Neither of you two are boomers, but baby boomer leaders in churches are still expecting people to show up at a designated time for a one-time training event. And then we're so disappointed when other people don't show up, right?
Yep.
So we need to be more flexible than that. We need to introduce our people to more meetings online and more Zoom type meetings, and not that everybody's going to have to come to one place and drive to church on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, and I think one thing on that is like, I remember back when Google, what was their Google Hangout was a deal,
right.
And the platform was somewhat unstable. And then Skype was just basically a two-person user, you and almost like a face, just one person.
Almost like FaceTime.
Almost like FaceTime, yeah. And even FaceTime now, I guess you can add groups in or whatever.
Right.
So helping reintroduce new improvements to media that they may have tried before back when it was first coming out, and they said, oh, we could never do online training because it was a bad experience, but begin to reincorporate it now that the systems have gotten better,
One of the things that I think you may have been kind of alluding to, Brad, is that to some of us on this, we're like, well, duh, Zoom's been around forever, or Google Hangout or Skype or FaceTime or whatever, well, duh. But remember, it is still a newer concept to a lot of folks we deal with. And so we shouldn't assume that everyone automatically thinks, let's make this an online thing.
Yeah.
Let's schedule it for 8:00 at night. So whether you're traveling for business or whether you're at home, wherever you are, you actually, from your hotel room or from your office or from your home or from your car, can actually still participate.
Okay.
which if you're a person that likes to give a lot of excuses for why you can't be at a meeting, this sort of negates that. You're going to have to be more creative.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
The dog's going to have to eat your homework more often.
Well, your phone or your computer or something, right?
Or something.
Yeah.
You left your computer in the seat pocket of an airplane, which, I've never done.
You've never done that, except that she's done it twice, and once when she was coming to be with us.
That's right.
Yep.
Okay, another thing about today's volunteers is that since we are, and there's an app for everything, volunteers don't appreciate fly by the seat of your pants ministry anymore. The days of, let's get the new guy that just graduated college, he's 21 and he's got a cool beard. He'll probably be great at youth ministry, and the guy can't organize his way out of a paper bag. That doesn't fly with busy families anymore. Moms and dads who are, working, whether working at home or working outside of the home, have busy lives, busy schedules, things are calendared, and last minute doesn't just work. And so the last thing is volunteers are out of here, and they're out of here quickly. Gone are the days of giving polite notice that says, hey, I'm not going to volunteer next year. I just wanted to give you a couple of months notice that my term is done at the end of this school year. And give them a couple of months notice. No, volunteers will quickly move to the next thing if it's frustrating.
That fly by the seat of the pants is also, I hear sometimes, that they call that Holy Spirit planning. They blame the Holy Spirit that they just want to be
right.
They just want to be loose, and the Holy Spirit
follow the Spirit.
Yeah, it's like, no, you just are not organized. So sorry. Don't blame the Holy Spirit. So
right. Exactly. Well, I can't plan my messages 6 months ahead. I've got to be open to the Spirit. Well, you do have to be open to the Spirit, but Scripture also talks about God ordering our steps.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can certainly throw a planned sermon away to listen to the Spirit. But anyway, okay. Jennifer, what are your thoughts? You're on mute, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, this is good. And I do agree that there's, and with the ministry that I work with, we do have the baby boomers and older, but we also have the younger generation. And that's where I'm, in fact, this summer at our annual conference, I'm going to be talking about how to talk to the next generation and using, some materials that I've gotten, from Caro Powell and Stephen Argue.
Right.
That type of stuff just to help me to understand that. But, just even a simple texting, hey, we're going to get together at this place or whatever, that's, and we're finding, even with our constituents in our older generation, that we're finding that some of them, they're using their smartphones.
Sure, they
like
are.
A 2-year-old would use the smartphone. They know how to unlock it. They know how to do all of that, but they're utilizing that stuff to be able to help them with what they're doing. And so it's really good. This is good.
I find that, that as I advance through time in my baby boomer-ness, I could see me, and I do this somewhat, spend the rest of my professional life speaking to boomers in what they need to set aside. And one of the number one things that I tell church leaders, especially when they're that baby boomer age, is stop being angry that millennials do things differently, that millennials aren't running. Don't stop being angry that if you do a VBS, 40 families didn't join the church. It's wasted energy, it's wasted time, when actually you could spend that time finding ways to stop expecting them to come into the church. You could actually follow the Great Commission and go outside of the church. And so I could see myself dying on the soapbox of just speaking to my own generation for the rest of my time of how for us to, I'd love to see us step out of direct leadership and take on more mentoring roles so that we let young Gen Xers and millennials in and actually let them do it in their way. And we just bring the institutional wisdom. Mm-hmm. But we'd have to actually, we'd have to do things different. Mm-hmm. We might have to learn how to turn on our computers. So anyway, I digress. Okay, so this next slide, Brad, this might be new to you because this is something I've added in. This is kind of in a nutshell, some of the things that I've learned being a volunteer. Once we've identified who volunteers are, we'd be wise to start thinking more about what they want. And this is some of my experience. In trying to have an economy of time, a director at a church might put out a quick list for VBS. Let's just use VBS as an example because it's coming up. We might say, hey, we need 4 people to plate the cookies and share them around, and we need 3 people to set up the games each day, and we need 2 people, and to be judicious in our time, we organize it this way. And the one thing that we often forget is to make the heart connection of what are those I don't know why I'm calling cookie pushers, but what are the cookie ladies? Why are they there? Why is it important? What are they accomplishing because of that? And so when we connect people more with the real reason that they're doing it and how that job fits into the total rationale, the vision for what we want to accomplish, we get an easier yes, and that yes stays longer. It stays a yes longer. Rather than, they do the cookie thing at VBS this year, but they're never doing it again because it was easy to, it's easy to say no to. But if we shared why they're doing it and how it fits into the bigger picture, they're going to say yes that year, and they're going to say yes the next year.
Yeah, and I think you talk about this in the trainings I've been in. It's like that hospitality key is so important for people to see. Mm-hmm. And like, what if those 2 ladies, the part of it, if that were 2 of them or 2 guys or whatever, the cookie pushers. I love that idea, that name. That's a new name.
Yeah, and
cookie
it
pushers.
Sounds illegal.
It sounds illegal, but yeah. But they're also making sure that they know every kid's name as they're giving them a cookie, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so that it kind of leads me into my next 2 points on the screen that we're looking at. 5 things that today's volunteers want. The first thing, that heart connection. The second thing, we've got some of our volunteers that are happy at staying at what Mark DeVries calls Mark DeVries is the president of Ministry Architects and wrote the book Sustainable Youth Ministry and Family-Based Youth Ministry and the Bible. I don't know. He wrote a lot of things. Maybe he didn't write the Bible. But
the Book of Mark. He didn't write Book of Mark?
He did not write the Book of Mark.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
He may be old enough to write the Book of Mark, but I'm only saying that like as if he's going to be listening to this. So one of the things that Mark talks about is that there are a couple of kind of volunteers, and both are needed. One is what we'd call the helper status. These are very valuable volunteers. They are the folks that tell them how many cookies you want them to push around on the cart, tell them when you want them to push it, tell them why you're doing it, why it's important. But they probably don't want to spend a whole lot of emotional, spiritual time figuring out the whys and the rationale, or even figuring out better ways to do it. They want to come and help and do their job And that is great. And so we've got some volunteers that want to do that helper status. And so one of the things volunteers want us to do is figure out who they are. Where are they on this thing? And are we actually asking them to do the right thing? Because the third thing I say here is that some volunteers want to remain at helper status, but there are some that want to move to partner status. It's not better than, it's not greater than, it's just a little bit of a different investment. What partner status means is that you come across people in your recruiting that their heart, mind, soul, spirit is in it. And as church directors, staff people, leaders, we should probably make sure we look for those people who might need to be asked to do a little more. If they suggest some alternate ways to do something and it makes sense, listen to those people. Realize that when you've got people coming to you thinking through your systems and processes in volunteering, if they're actually thinking through it and they're thinking of solutions, it means that they're sitting at home or they're in the car or they're waiting in a line actually thinking through the ministry that they're connected with. And it means that not only do they want to just do what they're told, but they've become an emotional partner in the ministry. And this is the one thing that I've learned about myself in volunteering at my church. And God bless my church for letting me volunteer, because I'm the one that's there like once every 8 Sundays, right? Because I'm always in another church on a Sunday. But I sometimes wish my church would push me for more. I wish I've offered a few ideas about things, and they've been politely thought through, but not where a conversation was scheduled to say, now tell me more about what you're thinking, Stephanie. What was your thought behind this? What prompted you to say that? Because somewhere in my heart, I really want to be a partner in what we're doing. I don't need to take control. I don't need to have a leadership job. But like when I go on Wednesday nights with my 12 kids, I consider that I'm not just moving them place to place. They've become my group.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think what you said there was important about you desiring to be pushed a little bit for a deeper connection. That for them to say, we're seeing some really good stuff from your involvement here. Have you ever thought about this?
Or a great, Brad.
Yeah.
I think every once in a while, what I long for, I wish somebody would say to me, Stephanie, if you could do anything in this ministry you want, what would you do?
Yeah.
What have you thought through? And there are things that I've thought I would love to do. Like I would love to create a sub-team of people to work on milestones and rites of passage. I love that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. We're doing a great job at our church of those, but that's the kind of thing I'd like to connect to. I love that. I could take that off the plate of one of our staff people.
Mm-hmm.
If I go to them and say, this is what I'd like to do, and they haven't asked the question, I might feel like I'd look like an interferer.
Maybe they would put you in that consultant role that you stay out
true.
of. Right?
Or I was saying something that they aren't doing well. And so I wonder if volunteers don't suggest things because they're afraid of how it would be perceived.
True. Maybe.
Mm-hmm. So if staff came to me and say, hey, we see some skills and some gifts in you. What might God be calling to you? I would list 4 or 5 things.
Yeah.
We don't have to do all 4 or 5 things, but they're in my head and they're in my heart. And what if 1 or 2 of them actually meet a need?
Mm-hmm.
Or what if it connects to something the Spirit's been saying to somebody else? Okay, so the 4th thing is after a heart connection, after helper status. Some volunteers want helper status, somewhat partner status. I would say that if we have to, as staff people, directors, leaders, err on the side of too many details or too few details, err on the side of more details, too many details. Make a place that everyone can easily find the info they'd want to know if they bother to go find it. And what I mean by that is if you've got a team of volunteers, set up a Google Drive or a Dropbox or whatever your online storage system is so that all of the job descriptions are there. Set up, put in that folder guidelines. What are the behavioral guidelines? What's the covenant for the adults? What's the vision statement? What are the ministry goals? What are our rules and regulations? Now, some of the people out there listening might be thinking, if I created all of that, people won't go read it. Well, that's not necessarily true. Some people won't read it. Mm-hmm. I actually think your A-list kind of volunteers will read it. There's a reason why you, if you want to get something done, what's that saying? If you want to get something done, you ask a busy person. Mm-hmm. Those are your A-list kind of volunteers. It's because they do read stuff. They do gain knowledge from it. They want to know what they're doing. They want to do the right thing. And that leads to the last thing. More details is better than less, because the last thing is volunteers don't want their time wasted.
Yeah.
Maybe helper status volunteers might not mind it so much, but if you've got people who are ready to give their heart and soul at whatever piece of the puzzle they take, don't waste their time.
Yeah. And that goes back to what you said. I don't know if it was in response to what you've learned about, or I don't remember it, about the intentionality of it, you know, that you want to value the work that they're doing in such a way that they know that they are needed because their work is valuable to the students that they're interacting with, no matter, or the people that are interacting with, right? And I think what you said there about having a job description is often what you and I know, and I'm sure Jennifer does too, that often we don't have job descriptions for things that are volunteer status type things if we've not done the work, because we think, well, they're volunteers, they're just going to come in. But that's how you gain people's connection, is if they truly have some things spelled out. I've seen, like, what are we expected to do? And it's listed there, you know?
Yeah. You know, many people are, well, I know in churches that sometimes we operate as leaders. Like if we had volunteer job descriptions, people would be offended by that. Not your best volunteers. No, they aren't.
Right.
Because they want to know what's expected. I want to know the guidelines. I want to know the parameters. I want to know who's in charge of what. I'd like to know the systems around the ministry, because I want to operate within the system. Mm-hmm. And if I find a broken piece of the system, I'd love to know how I help fix the broken spot. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, if we don't waste the time of volunteers, if we have people in key areas, it's going to keep them saying yes to volunteering, because if we've put them in such a valuable place, it's harder to walk away from. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, I feel sorry for people who said, yeah, I said I'd teach this Sunday school class as interim for a few months until they found a permanent somebody, and that was 4 years ago. That's a little different thing. Never promise somebody something you're not gonna deliver. But I'm more likely to say yes to volunteering on Wednesday nights next year, just because when and if I don't show up, first of all, now the kids ask for me and they have their moms Facebook me. It's so cute.
That's cute.
My kids were asking where you were tonight. I'm more likely to say yes to next year because my time was valued and I had real responsibilities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that too, that that job description, those real responsibilities help create that boundary of, gives them the ability. I'm teaching a class on boundaries this weekend, and so the saying, you know what you can say no to, because which allows you to say yes to the things that you're supposed to do, right? So
right.
And that's what that job description helps provide, what the yeses and what the nos can be, you know?
So here is a quick little slide here that shows some of the information that many volunteers would just would love. If you're a church staff person or a volunteer leader, director in your church, and you are currently recruiting people for next fall's ministry, and you went to somebody and said, I'd like you to consider teaching 4th grade on Wednesday nights, and you handed them a packet with this information in it, you've just dialed up your chances of getting a yes by 80%, because you're giving them all this information. Hand your volunteers a packet of information that's got the children's calendar or the youth ministry calendar. Give them all the calendar dates and give them a link to all of this online as well. Hand them a paper hard copy version, because that's just kind of darn impressive. But once you hand me the paper version, I'm going to need the electronic version, just because I travel so much that I know I'm going to be looking at it from 30,000 feet. Everybody's busy, so they're going to want to go to it electronically as well. But anyway, you're handing them a packet that's got the year-long calendar. You're handing them a job description that says, here's what the job entails, and which also then says, here's what the job doesn't entail. Give them guidelines. What are the expectations? Tell me, it's okay to tell me when you want me to stay, when you want me to arrive, how long you want me to stay. Tell me what the dismissal expectations are. Tell me, it's okay to say, please don't leave until the last child goes, or please make sure that there's 2 adults in the room before you take off, that kind of thing. I think volunteers want to know the vision, values, and goals of the ministry. Don't assume they don't. I want to know where we're going and why we're doing what we're doing. I'd love to know a teaching calendar. Even if I'm not teaching, I'd like to know spiritually where we're going for the next year. And then last but not least, I think knowing the organizational chart, not so much the official one of the church, but I want to know, who do I go to when I need some supplies? Who do I go to if I'm frustrated about this? Who do I go to if I have a discipline issue? You know, that kind of organizational chart, so that when I'm newer volunteering, I don't get frustrated by the navigating the new. Know what I mean?
Yeah. And I would say too, I think one of the things that we try to do at our church is make sure that this packet is not only given to the volunteers and online, but also that they're in every classroom, that this packet is there, accessible and updatable, you know, so that if some of these things are static, like job descriptions, that's fine. But the calendar needs to be updated. The teaching plan,
Sure.
they need to be updated,
And Brad, I know that there's some youth director or children's director out there that's part-time getting paid 15 hours a week, and they're sitting there going, holy cow, I don't have time to do all of this. Well, no, you don't.
Yeah.
But here's the good word. There's lots of it you can find online. There's
Yep.
lots of it. You can even go to my company's website, ministryarchitects.com, and you'll find a lot of it free and downloadable. But the even better good news is that most of this information, you only have to set it up once. You only have to create it once. And then every year for the next 5, 6, 7 years, you're just updating it. It just needs to be tweaked. Maybe this year it changed to this or that, or you're fixing this or that, but you don't have to start it from fresh every year. It's much easier. In fact, you can even recruit somebody for year 2 just to update it.
Right.
Okay, let's look at the next thing. We got a couple more slides before we close out for the day. So how do you recruit today's volunteers? And this is just completely borrowed from Jesus recruiting the disciples. And if you think about it, he had gone to be baptized by his cousin John. And at the end of that baptism, the heavens open and the Spirit descends like a dove. And I think that is telling for our recruiting process. Our recruiting of volunteers should be less haphazard, more of a thing, a process, a program itself, a calendar thing itself. And it should start with completely turning over to the power of the Holy Spirit, invoking the Spirit's involvement, not just opening in prayer, but saying, Holy Spirit, over this next month, show us who needs to do this for next year. Give us names who needs to do that. Let's involve God in the recruiting and ask him to lift up names of who would be good for this and this and that. And so invoke the Spirit. Secondly, in recruiting of volunteers, once you pray and once you invoke and once you have said, God, show us, then identify who God is lifting up. Let's trust the process. What names are coming? Let's say you, Brad, you and Jennifer and I were a recruiting team in our church, and we're all praying about it. And if we trust the process, God's going to give us all the same names. So so who are those names? Who do we know that's good at this? Then the third step is you simply personally have to invite people. A bulletin ad just doesn't cut it. You know why? A bulletin note might get you people who will push the cookie cart. But when you do it by the bulletin or even a quick little begging announcement on a Sunday morning, you don't actually have a face-to-face conversation with somebody where you can share with them the heart connection of why this is important. The next step number 4, after invoke, identify, invite, is just spend some time initiating them. Give people a chance. If they're not sure if teaching 3rd grade is for them, let them teach for a month and see how they like it. Ask them how they're doing. What could you do differently? How would you like to see it function differently? And if you give people in that initiation a chance to tell you ways that they really love it or ways they'd like to see it be better, you've got a great chance of keeping them, continuing on. But also, if there's an initiation process, you've got an out for both them and maybe you if they don't work out. Does that make sense? So that little initiation period could be a month or 2 that you just say, let's take a look at this. And then last but not least, Jesus did this. He initiated a bunch of disciples into his process. And then it kind of wound up being that he spent 3 years with about 12 of them, just deeply pouring into them, informing them of great ways to do ministry. And this is probably one of the greatest things that I've learned from Mark DeVries, and I've learned a lot of great things from him. And that is, in our jobs, whether we're full-time or part-time, the largest percentage of how we spend our time each week should be spent on our volunteer development, whether it's documents, coffee chats, just helping initiate someone in the actual recruiting. The second percentage of time then is spent in the face-to-face with children or youth. But what happens is that we tend to get so focused on the face-to-face with the teenagers we're called to serve that the very last thing we spend time on is in the volunteer management. And we're wondering why we're always spinning our wheels looking for more people.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah, please.
So what kind of rhythm, or maybe what does your church do where you are now? How is that informs done? Because I hear it a lot of times from youth ministry leaders or children's ministry leaders that's the struggle they often have. Like, when do they provide additional training, or when do they provide additional resources, connection, those kind of things?
That's a great question. First of all, if I were setting up a rhythmic week for me, if I were back in a church, and let's just say I'm full-time, but the math still works whether you're 40 hours, 20 hours, or 10 hours. But let's say I'm full-time, and I'm going to set up a rhythmic week for myself. I would probably always set Thursday as the day that I'm going to focus on volunteer development. And why Thursday? Because that's enough time for me to spend, maybe part of that development is me sending ahead next week's lessons. It gives me a chance, like if maybe I want to set up some coffee chats with people that, I can meet with them on Saturday or even for the next week. It would be the time where Wednesday programming is behind me, so I don't have the tyranny of the urgent of Wednesday programming. Hopefully on Thursday, I've gotten even Sunday's programming all organized and out. So Thursday is just a day where I would work on my documents. I would be setting up times with people. I would be organizing what that month's video is. Maybe once a month there's a link. Hey team, here's this month's training video. Watch it sometime. Maybe have a little at our once a month team Zoom meeting, have a couple of questions that connect to the months before video. So I know if people actually watched it. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah,
Brad?
I think so. I think what you said there too was, I think sometimes we think, or we have this idea that we have to do this large gathering of them or keep them after longer or whatever. And the reality is they're tired, and they're not really focused. Maybe their parents they're responsible for some specific children too. And then
Right.
You got the hanger-ons that mom and dad, we forgot that we were supposed to pick
Yeah, we're
Johnny.
supposed to pick up our kids.
Yeah, we thought they were staying there with you. So like this, to make it flexible and adaptable to the people, right? So it's accessible. Right. Maybe this one volunteer really has to have a face-to-face in order for them to be informed. But Jennifer might be fine being informed by an email or by a link to a video,
And I know this PowerPoint slide alone feels really business detail oriented.
Mhm.
Let me then connect to the heart purpose of it. The more that each of us reorients our ministry time to pouring into the volunteers, the more all of the other pieces are going to fall in place. When we pour into developing our volunteers, we get more buy-in to the vision we have for the ministry. When we pour into the volunteer, rather than just one person trying to win over parent involvement or church involvement, all of a sudden we've got 4 people or 8 people or 12 people also being cheerleaders for the ministry, because we're making them helpers. We're making not helpers. We're making them partners. And the more that we pour into our volunteers, the more students we reach, which is really the goal to begin with, right? Because one person can only reach so many students. The more we pour into our volunteers, the more sustainable our ministry is beyond us. Whether we leave to go back to school or leave to get another job or break our leg in a tragic ski accident, we're out for 8 weeks. We really want a ministry that will last 6 months with no other director involved. And if we've created such a structure, that ministry is sustainable beyond us while we can go find another person. Let's take a look at our matriculation slide here then. Once you find some people, here's a process of just kind of implementing them into the ministry itself. Step 1 is they've shown an interest and you've shown an interest in them. Step 2 is you kind of sat down over a cup of coffee together and had a little bit of a consultation with each other. Step 3, of course, is before you go any further, you already have done the background check, the safe sanctuary training. You've gotten them to sign a volunteer covenant. Now, I think churches are getting better at recognizing they should do background checks. Brad, you know this better than anybody else. There are still churches out there that don't do it, but at least they know they're supposed to, and they understand why.
Right.
Little difference here in this slide is having also a teacher/volunteer covenant that covers those things that are particular to your church. It's okay to ask your teachers, hey, we want you to be in church yourself. We'd like you to be a member of this church. I mean, that's up to you or not, whatever your covenant guidelines are. But it's okay to ask a little bit more of our volunteers.
And one thing that we do too, like Sunday, I'll do a training for a church, and actually Julie is going to do a training at another church around safe sanctuaries and boundaries. But what can happen there, whether you get into a rhythm of doing that in the spring and in the fall, or possibly as needed, and then they receive the training, and at the same time they sign a form that said, I have attended this training on such and such date, and I agree that I agree to have a background check.
Right.
You know, so and so that way they've had training. They've said, yes, you can background check me, or no, you can't, and then you decide whether or not the person may not serve. So, but they've had training.
So yeah, we give them some orientation to the program, to the ministry, even just walking them around, showing them where the supply closet is, where kids go for, for this or that. We give them some actual training in, here are some, depending on what they're doing, here are some great ways to carry on conversations with teenagers. Here's great ways to ask questions, whatever their particular volunteering, giving them some training in that area. We should never assume that people know what to do. It's helpful. I don't mind going to training myself because I always learn things, or even if I don't learn things, I hear things that I knew once and I hadn't heard in a while, and it's helpful. And so then step 7, the last step of matriculating your volunteers in your ministry, is to simply placing them where they and you agree for them to go, I would say with a loophole that allows for, hey, you've been teaching this class for a couple of months. Do you feel comfortable in this area? Or is there another part of our system you feel even more called to?
Yes.
That kind of thing.
And I would say often what we do is we interest shown placement. We rush the process very quickly.
Yeah, definitely. That is true. That actually happened with me in my church, and it could be because there was maybe the staff involved knew that I knew things.
Mm-hmm.
So I know actually how to be in ministry to children and teenagers, but they didn't know that for sure.
Right.
But I showed interest, and boom, I was.
Yep.
I don't know.
I think you've said this before, maybe, and is that, and that can be scary. That's scary for people. You can scare people off who they're sort of dipping their toe in the water, and the next day or the Sunday afterwards, they're already leading a class, and they've had no consultation or no orientation. Just sort of like, hey, yes, okay, here's a group of rabid third graders. So
I love it. Rabid.
So and you choose to lose your religion right there.
Yeah, right.
But anyway.
Yeah. So a couple of other quick tips as we're closing off this portion for today is number one, when you're thinking and creating a list of who you want to ask, if you ask Holy Spirit, show me names of people to ask about our ministry. Number one coaching tip, don't say no for somebody else. If the Spirit brings the name to you, the Spirit may be speaking to that person. Don't assume that person's going to say no. Make the ask and let that person say no for themselves, because they just might say yes.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, and we kind of alluded to this, the second best volunteer tip is, if you've recruited someone, don't take their job away from them.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ask them to come and push the cookie cart and then assume maybe they weren't going to do it right, or assume they weren't going to show up, and then you have somebody else there. Or, you've recruited some busy, talented people, and then you don't let them use their talent.
Right.
And you just sort of have them filling in here and there. That'll get you people saying goodbye pretty quick. So never say no for anybody. And then if you recruit them, never take their job away. And if you're afraid, well, I don't know this person that well. I don't know if they're going to show up prepared Sunday morning to teach rabid third graders.
Mm-hmm.
My answer to that would be, then you shouldn't be recruiting them for such a big thing if you don't know them that well. Right. We've missed some steps in the matriculation process somewhere because we haven't spent any time with them kind of consulting to figure out if this is something they'd be good at and giving them what they need.
Would you recommend a one way to help them orient in beyond just a conversation and so on, is if you have an experienced teacher to partner them and let them shift in, like where the partner the experienced teacher might be a 4 or 5 week teacher at this spot, and then that person is transitioning and then they switch roles or something. Is that recommended?
Yeah, that's a great idea. And here's some input to that too. For those of you that are directors out there, and those of you, whether you're staff, paid, or volunteer, whenever you're team teaching people, your idea is great, Brad. So when you do that, don't leave all of the figuring out to the 2 teachers And the reason why I say that is, what if you have a new volunteer come in that could actually, maybe be good at the teaching, but they've come in at sort of the second standpoint
Mm-hmm.
and never actually get a chance to actually teach the lesson because the other person's been there, and then the second person feels underutilized, and there was never an initiated conversation from the leader director saying, okay, how's it going, team teaching? Do you need to share? How can we set this up? How can we set it up that everybody feels good about it, and everybody's gifts are being utilized best? One of the things that I know, being in a church in the South, is that, we Southern women can, suffer from extreme politeness.
Right.
And so it's hard for us sometimes to say, hey, I would have really liked to taught that lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. So a smart director leader knows how to ask that question so that the people involved get a chance to say yes, no, maybe.
Right, right.
So Brad, I think that's it for today. It feels like we've kind of used up our time.
You had one more slide. I had you go back and.
Oh yeah, it's just my contact info.
Yeah.
Anybody that would like some volunteer development recruiting template documents I have, feel free to email me. My email address is stephanie.caro@ministryarchitects.com. And if you're listening and don't know how to spell that, just go to ministryarchitects.com and you'll find my email address there, and email me and say, hey, I'd love your volunteer documents, and I'll send you. I've got like 6, 7, 8 that I send to people, and they're the kind of thing you download them and then you make them your own, but they'll give you some great ideas, and you can use those as helps when you're recruiting for this next school year.
Yep.
All right, Brad. Well, there you go, sir.
Do you know the name of your new book yet?
We do. Thanks for asking. It is 10 Solutions for the Smaller Church.
Good. Is that did you and Melissa Rao work on that one together?
We did. Yeah, we did. And so it has gone through all of its edits, mm-hmm. and is now it's been through its context editing. Mm-hmm. It's now in its line editing process, which is the last step.
Okay.
Looking for typos.
Well, my first introduction, I think, before I even met you, I already liked you. That sounds like a song. Thriving Youth
like a
Ministry.
Country song.
Yeah. Thriving Youth Ministry in a Smaller Church was one of the first introductions to Stephanie and Rick Cromie. And then, of course, 99 Thoughts.
99 Thoughts.
There's a series of books called 99 Thoughts on different things, and that was really good. And then, of course, we had the opportunity to write a Smaller Church Youth Ministry, No Staff, No Money, No Problem together, and that was fun. And so I just appreciate your friendship. Jennifer, do you have any final question or thought?
Yeah, actually I do. Can you kind of address, say someone new is coming into a children's ministry position, and there's already an established volunteer, thing, and you're going along and you're working with some of those volunteers, but you're finding that some of those volunteers really are not doing that great. And how do you address, when there's volunteers that are really struggling with things and struggling with you as a new leader and coming under your authority and your leadership, and just how do you deal with that in the retraining? And if they choose not to do the retraining, to lovingly say thank you so much for what you've done in the past, maybe your season.
Great question. Great question, because that happens. Mm-hmm. you know, you come on staff at a church and you inherit what you inherit. And perhaps you inherit people that love God and love kids. It doesn't mean that they're really called or skilled or have been discipled to be good at that job. So here is the good news to this. When we're recording this, this is the end of April. Today is like the 24th,
That's
something
right.
like that. This is the best time of year to deal with what you just said, Jennifer, because what you didn't say, but what I heard, being the consultant that I am, is how do you deal with these volunteers you've inherited that are a little less developed than you'd like them to be without making them mad or creating a political brouhaha over the reorientation, right? Is that kind of what we're really saying? How do you do this without making people mad because you're new and you don't want them to, you want them to like you? This is the best time of year because we're almost at the end of the school year. So if you're coming on staff now or anytime in the spring, you could put up with anything for the rest of the school year, you know, unless you've got something dangerous. If you have something dangerous, it just stops right then and there.
Yep.
Because our first call is to children and teenagers, not to that adult. So if there's something dangerous, it just ends right away.
Right.
But if you've got some iffy situations, some people that haven't done training, you wish they were better, the class is kind of boring, you know that things are going to switch up for the summer. And if they don't switch up for the summer, you could switch them up, because summer's a great time to say, hey, let's do something different.
That's right.
So in our differentness, we could fix things that hide under the excuse of, we're going to do something new. We're going to give the summer some sizzle. And so you fix some things there. And then, so you've already disoriented it a little bit because you're going to do new things for the summer. Whenever the fall comes around, then that is a great opportunity to put new systems in place, and everybody's expecting there to be new. Everybody's expecting something new, different, or documents to be in place, or guidelines or expectations at the start of the school year. I mean, that's why parents have to go to parent meetings at the school. That's why they have to meet with the teacher. That's why they have to go to a soccer meeting. Everybody's expecting something's going to be different. What's new this year? So that's where you as the director get to fix a lot of things as well. You could be saying, without pointing to one person in particular, you could be saying, oh, thank you all for serving so well in these last years. Thank you for being a part of this next year. Here's what our plan's going to be. And when you're saying it to everyone, you don't have to pinpoint the one. However, you can fix some things depending on where the less than desirable is. You can fix some things in like a teacher covenant guideline. That's where you put out some rules that say, I as a teacher agreed to do this, not do this, this, not this, blah, blah, blah. You can fix it there because everybody's signing it. So if you've got some people that never show up for church and you want to change that, here's the new rules. You're not pointing out anybody particular, but they may self-select themselves out. And that's really what you want to have happen, is you've got some people that are less desirable. You know, God loves them, you love them, but maybe they need to be serving somewhere else. If you get them to choose to not be out, to choose to go somewhere else to serve, all the better.
Yeah. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for being on with us today. It's great stuff.
My pleasure.
I always enjoy being with you. And that was a great question to end on, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And thanks for being with us as well. And we look forward to seeing your book come out. So make sure we know.
Yes. I don't know when it's, I am guessing it'll be available electronically sooner than it will be in print, but I don't know when.
Okay.
You know, I just wrote it,
That's right.
I
And,
just, I don't know.
yeah.
All right,
All right.
friends.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
so
much.
much. All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.